Question number one. Is one of the most common Z clauses in own experience are the obligations to include back-to-back clauses in subcontracts. Sometimes this causes issues. For example, when the subcontract program is not aligned with the main contract program, it can cause trouble in the assessment of a compensation event that arises from the subcontract on the main contract. In your experience, what are the best practices for a good application of back-to-back clauses in ECC? Nicola, let's get the legal cut first. We've touched on it, so this is more of a refresher, I guess, but
Sure.
Anything to say on that one?
I mean, I think just generally in terms of the back-to-back clauses, before I hand over to Jon for the actual application of the programme stuff, we talked about it this morning, really. It's mainly just making sure now to read. It's mainly making sure that you're flowing down what is relevant to that subcontract. It's that kind of thing of, if you have your whole full, as a main contractor, if you've got your full scope, you don't necessarily give that to the subcontractor and say, take your pick of what's relevant. And with the clauses in the contract in terms of being back to back, that needs thought in the actual conditions as well. It's not just the scope that needs tailoring to that subcontract, it's also the actual conditions to see how relevant they are. But I'll hand over to Jon for the actual issue about the programme.
Okay, so if we take the issue of the programme, as I see it, I'm a main contractor, I'm given constraints in the scope about which I've got a programme within. But then I subcontract out to numerous subcontractors along the supply chain, and some of them don't perform and my programme's flexible. But then, unless I've specified those constraints in the subcontract scope, then the subcontractor doesn't have to program to them. But if I specify them, well, actually my main contract program flexes about, and therefore the subcontractor potentially has lots of compensation events at a subcontract level because these constraints either change, which I've specified, or they weren't specified in the first place, and now I'm a main contractor imposing lots of extra constraints on the subcontractor based on the performance of other subcontractors. Some of them, and changes at main contract level. So some of them I can pass on because it results from an instruction at main contract level, which I can pass down, but a lot of them potentially I can't. So I think that's the issue with that, in that specific question. What are the best practices for good application of back-to-back clauses in ECC? Well, the very simple thing, the very easy thing to do, and I'll talk in generally because I don't actually have an answer to that specific. The easy thing to do is just pass on lock, stock and barrel all the option Z clauses, right? In which case, you will have, what you will have is you will have subcontractors who are not compliant with it, and you probably won't be. So it is actually to intelligently go through them and cut out them and say which ones can the subcontractor manage, which ones can't they, which is our job, etc. And the other thing is which ones can they bear, or they will include a risk premium if they're aware of them. But ultimately what you don't want to happen is that the subcontract, and I think Nicola alluded to this in her talk, becomes inoperable because it's got so much stuff which no one can manage, particularly those along the supply chain who are very good at the trades, but not necessarily brilliant at the management of the contract, administration of the contract. Yeah. So intelligently think through which ones are passed on rather than just do it lock, stock and barrel.
Yeah. Good. I think the wider issue, so that's a very specific part of the question. The wider issue is when you've got contractors who simply go to the trouble to set up an individual subcontract with any key dates, any sectional completions, any specific Z clauses, and then chuck in this throwaway clause that says, and by the way, you've got to comply with everything in the main contract, capital M, capital C, and they say that's available back at head office and it's not particularly accessible. But they're just saying, they take the trouble to set up an individual contract, but then say, and by the way, you've got to comply with everything in the main contract. That's horrendous. And that is something, carrying on from Yusuf's talk this morning, that's something I think we need to eradicate. This was the first poll we put in of January 2024, and as an industry, the question was, can we eradicate contractors adding an obligation to comply with everything in the main contract in a subcontract? 66% said yes, we can and we should. 27% said nice idea, but not realistic. And 7% said no, and what's wrong with it? And it will not surprise you to see none of those 7% were invited today. So that's crazy. So we're just passing this, comply with everything in the main contract. That's something we need to do. We need to put it on the list. That's one of the problems that subcontractors are having, that they're just expected carte blanche to comply with everything in the contractor's main contract. That cannot be sustainable as an industry. Okay, Sarah asked this one, she's gone, it's quite a nice one. So 20 seconds each, and you are allowed to abstain, so we're not going to force it. What is the worst single clause? Rake's gone, she'd be horrified to suggest there's anything wrong. But so we're not, NEC's great, we're all passionate, we love NEC. But what's the single worst clause of NEC? Which one would you like to get rid of and why? So, Barry, we'll go along the line. Have you got one? You are allowed to abstain.
Oh, I don't know. I think I've got a couple. I mean, I don't know about getting the single worst one, but I think certainly improving 60.112 that me and Richard were talking about, and maybe I think me and Jon were talking about 50.4 as well in terms of assessing. If you don't submit an application for payment, you don't get any further payment.
No, that's fair.
Yeah.
Get your applications in.
Get your applications in, yeah.
Why draconian? Why so draconian?
Jon, it's not your turn yet.
Make
Richard?
them do what it says in the chuffing contract.
However daft it is.
Okay, you're allowed your own vote, so that was Barry's. Richard, one clause to get rid of?
I'll join Glenn in removing the option for the PM to unilaterally bring forward key dates, which is ridiculous.
Ooh, yeah.
Thank you. Can you please work with Richard? Because when I shared that with the NEC panel, the panel were not convinced it was a problem. We need to do work on that. I agree with you. We need to work with the panel on that and explain why it is an issue.
How do you value the compensation of it?
Yeah, so we need to work with them because that was one they didn't jump at and were not convinced it was necessary. We need to educate them why that is. That's mine as well. So,
okay.
Andy?
I'll just go for a gripe, which is working areas italics and working areas capitals. I think it's hugely confusing and it's caused multiple arguments on jobs I've worked on over the years when contractors have asserted that one is the other.
Okay. Jon?
I was going to go for 50.4 again. I think that was introduced into NEC 4 was if the contractor does not submit an application before the assessment date, so not on the assessment date, you get zero money for that month. I just think that is a totally over-the-top sanction. You have a project manager who we know is meant to be an impartial administrator. They won't have as much knowledge. There's no way they're going to pay more than the contractor thinks. If anything, they're going to pay less. So why nothing?
Sarah? Sorry,
Nicola.
I'm looking at Sarah's question.
Sarah's also a lawyer, so you know. I've gone for a slightly different approach. I've gone for one that I always forget is even there. So 20.3, option C to F. The contractor advises the project manager on the practical implications of the design of the works and on the subcontracting arrangements. I just feel a bit like, what's it really doing? It's touching on lots of things that are elsewhere in the contract. I forget it's there. When I see Z clauses, it's often been taken out. Why do we have it? If it's trying to say something, I think it needs to say more.
Agree, I think. Neil, last word.
I don't know if this is going to be controversial or not, having thought about it. Deemed acceptance of the programme.
What, you want to delete it?
Yeah.
Okay,
And
moving on.
I say that. I say that because what I see, since it's been introduced, is really bad decisions being made. Sloppy decisions, last-minute decisions, just to meet the time limit. Poor quality decisions being made, any spurious reason being found, just so the project manager can comply with the timescale. And what happens, it gets rejected. Okay, so now I'm doing delay analysis on this project. Which program am I using? The rejected one. Everybody would do that in that situation. If you end up in dispute, you'll use all the programs, whether they were rejected or not, to do the delay analysis. It's the best information you've got. So I like the idea of it. The idea was absolutely fine, but give somebody a new toy and they'll abuse it. They'll just bang it around and use it to their own ends. And that's what I increasingly see is it's not being used properly. If it was used properly in the way it was intended, great. But it's back to the point I made earlier. Is the problem the contract, or is it the people using the contract?
Okay, interesting thoughts. So we can take some of these and run with them in the group. So we can explain why we think maybe some of those shouldn't be there or don't need to be there. Interesting. Number 3, this was from Jason. Is Jason still here for Portsmouth City Council? Jason? So what are the keys to a successful partnership when one party is the paymaster who serves the public and the other contracting stakeholders driven by profit? So Jason obviously representing Portsmouth City Council. Barry, anything to share on this?
Well, I think the key to this is always, and when you set the contracts up, to try and set out the risk allocation, absolutely understand what the risk allocation is going to be between the parties. And I think, there's been a point made today already that it doesn't happen, just because you use NEC, it doesn't happen by magic. You do need to have to work at it to make sure you can get the parties aligned in terms of doing the work and making sure that we're absolutely clear about what the risk and the allocation is between the parties, I think.
Neil, anything to add?
I think a dose of reality, from my experience, is, if you look at the case law on mutual trust and cooperation, one of the things they clarified was that it doesn't mean you have to act against your own commercial interest. So you've got a commercial dilemma from the start, because you're always against each other, because your objectives are to deliver the project within a budget envelope that's been signed off. The contractor's objective is to make a profit. Now, if we could all just accept that from the start, then we've just given a set of rules to administer. So if the contractor's got entitlement, they've got entitlement. It's not the contractor's fault that a bad contract was written or a bad contract was managed. And I've seen this come up before where the client is a local authority, somebody, and, we're a public sector body. I'm sorry, I'm not a charity, I'm a contractor. You've signed up to the rules of engagement. You haven't managed it very well, which is often the reason. So I don't see it. And as a taxpayer, I don't want that being the excuse. Because as a local authority and as government, you have other responsibilities to society, which is about prosperity, about the economy, about jobs, about sustainability. So it's a bit short-sighted, I think, is that whole thing. But getting people to understand it is the challenge, isn't it? There's something bigger at stake here.
Rich, anything?
I say there must be a shout here for a target cost contract. We all know that the theory is that the target cost contract means that the client gives a monkeys about how much it's actually costing, and therefore, in theory, will collaborate. Now, there's lots of negatives of target cost contracts. We know the hassle of auditing cost and so on, but as a driver for collaboration, surely the target cost contract is a way to go.
Great. Question 4. Steve Pearce, you still here? Steve, I've seen Steve somewhere. Steve's at the back. So Steve, the early warning has become in many cases an 80 EW after the event warning. Is this due to lack of knowledge of the process or a belief that this is necessary? It seems to become more prevalent in cost reimbursable contracts. Richard, lead the way on this one. Or Neil can lead the way.
Is it due to lack of knowledge? Well, clearly yes. Mm-hmm. Clearly we all know that there's an obligation to give an early warning as soon as you're aware of, and people need to get in that mindset. We've heard lots of talk about that today, and all the good things that early warning is about. Early warning is highly recommended, by the way, in your marriage. Highly good plan. Try that at home. Early warning register. Have you got one at home? Generally a good way to go.
Do you only communicate in a forgery red copy?
Don't ask Colette about that. So it's just education again. Education. Again, we talked about that today, that contractors do throw in spurious early warnings, but we don't have to talk about them all. We choose which ones we bother to talk about. So use the process properly. I can't say any more than that.
Neil, anything to add?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, Glenn, that after all these years, we're still talking about some of the same things that you try. And again, it's how many people will stop sending early warnings, or it's going to lead to a compensation event. But of course, it's absolutely the opposite way around. If you're a PM, one of your biggest issues is having information. So even if some of those may be a little bit spurious, I'd rather a contractor is telling me about those things, because we can filter it and decide what's important on it. It's the lack. So to me, more increasingly, on the airports, you used to have risk and opportunities, but also it's about being kept informed as a PM to be able to make informed decisions, because you've still got the choice, haven't you? You're going to make the choice as a PM. It's not going to be the contractor. You're going to make a choice. All I want the contractor to do is tell me that potentially is a problem.
Yeah.
But it is a problem that we do see, after the event, somebody sends you an early warning. Well, that's great, isn't it?
Well, it's Seeker Bulletin number 42, and it's number 42 because we didn't realise we had to talk about it because we thought everyone knew about it.
Yeah.
But we've had to talk about it. You have anything to add?
I just agree with everything that's been said. Must be a lack of knowledge. I'm guessing this is, I can see it's from a contractor, but it must be the contractors that are doing this, is it? The late early warning. Do you get clients? Clients just don't do it, or project managers just don't do it. But the late early warnings I've seen from contractors are usually when it's gone to the contractor's commercial team and they're about to do a CE and they go, oh shit, we haven't done an early warning, I best put one in now. No, still not a valid early warning. It wasn't early enough.
Sorry, it's a bit of a leading question, but actually was coming from client staff, because it's an ELC and think they're invested in the cost, are now saying, your crane stood still last week, so I'm putting it in now because I'm going to leave the disallowed cost later. Mainly a bit of opinion, but that's what I'm seeing, that they're putting them in as a marker because they're invested in that.
Yeah, because I want to disallow it. Yeah, wow.
That's an abuse of it, but I've
Never ceases to amaze me what goes on out there. It really does not. It is bonkers. We just need to get back to some basics, I think. People need a shake-up. They need to be told. And I think, unfortunately, we all have resource constraints. There's a lot of people out there in industry who haven't got the training, the experience, the knowledge. They need support. They need help. If you just let them loose on a job, they run riot.
Okay, question 5. Clause 50.4, so we talked about this. So 50.4 of NEC 4 provides that if no application is provided, the client has no responsibility to pay for work done in the period. There is no provision for the client to make a payment if they wanted to. This would be ex gratia action, possibly leading to a CE. So how does this reconcile the principles of the Fair Payment Charter, the Housing Grants Act, and the subsequent scheme for construction contract regulations that was specifically put in place? Hence Jon's point about why is it there? Shouldn't we be deleting that altogether because it's a bit draconian? Andy, Stanley has brought that from HS2. Andy, and then I'll go to Nicola.
I mean, the first thing I'd say about this is there's a very easy way for a contractor to avoid this, which is just put your application in.
It's not difficult, is it?
Which doesn't seem like the biggest ask in the world, and contractors, in my experience, are usually pretty good at this. But I have been PM on a project where they just stopped applying, and it made the PM's job incredibly hard. So I'm now left in a situation where I've got to measure the job as the project manager without any information. Now, you would think that my assessment of this would be quite disappointing, but apparently it wasn't, because this was a situation that persisted for months and months and months.
NEC 3, presumably.
It was a 3, yes. Which is why I think this was brought in on 4. Plus, as a contractor, why wouldn't you want to do this, particularly if you're on a C or an E? Because on that forward-looking piece, if I'm the PM, how can I possibly know some of the stuff that you are going to be exposed to in the coming months if you don't tell me? I just don't get why anyone would particularly think this is a problem. Put your application in, get it to me in time. I think Jon does have part of a point of getting it in advance. Yeah, okay, we can argue about that, but what are we talking about there? 24 hours or something like that?
Yeah.
And actually putting it before, there is a level of logic to that. I'm not sure I agree about the cynical exploitation bit either. I mean, it says you get 0 unless there are other amounts. It's the only way it could go negative, in my view, is if you've got delay damage, basically, or a KPI damage or something like that. I don't think you can actually deduct off the previous defined cost amount. How it reconciles with all the other stuff, look, it's the rules. Follow the rules, you have a problem.
It's only going to happen once, isn't it?
Out of interest, how many people here have had that happen to them, that they've been late submitting an application for payment?
Anyone had a payment set at 0? Raise your hand.
I've elected to overlook it on a first application.
Yeah. I understand why NEC did it, because I've only come across it 4
Portsmouth City
times.
Council, the only horrible client.
Hang on, he's elected to overlook it. He can't
the
do
rules.
that.
It's the rules.
Yeah, but I did.
Yeah. I mean,
What would be a more interesting question? Contractors, how many times have you done that to subcontractors? All right, I won't ask you to vote, but I suspect there'll be more hands up to that point. Nicola.
Yeah. I mean, not much to add. I mean, obviously, if we're looking at the Construction Act, yes, okay, the intention there is to have regular payment and for that to flow down to subcontractors. And I think, obviously under the Construction Act or the scheme, you have the payment notice coming from the payer, say the client. And if they don't provide that, then it can be the payee or the contractor's notice, which is deemed accepted. So that will be implied anyway into these contractual terms. So you do have that kind of, although that's not, it doesn't sit there and say, well, but if they don't submit anything, then it's zero. It doesn't actually anticipate whether they don't put anything in. But in a way, it sort of does balance it, I suppose, arguably, that 50.4 says, well, actually, okay, if you, Mr. Contractor, don't put anything in, then it's essentially going to be probably zero. And if we fail to do our job, then whatever you have put in is deemed accepted. So there is an element of balance to that, which may be fair enough. But yeah, I mean, it doesn't quite sit well with the intention of the Act. Regular payment, is intended by them, but what is a project manager supposed to do if they don't have the application for payment, particularly if you're looking at an option C or an E?
Yeah, as Andy said, yeah, totally. Because C and E is all based on forecast, how many toilet rolls have you ordered for the welfare facilities? How do we know how much has been spent and such like?
I'd also worry in this, Glenn, if the client did get involved in the payment process because they're not at the moment. So you end up with a three-way negotiation there between the project manager, the client and the contractor. I think that'd be a nightmare.
Okay, time is against us, and we will, I say this every year, we will try and give the question time panel longer next year, and we will do it next year, so we'll have a bit longer. There was one that I'll just answer very briefly. Should NEC introduce a discretion to the project manager to waiver the requirement for a notice under 61.3, where an early warning has been previously raised and the client was fully aware of the potential consequences? So this is talking about the time barring, and if a contractor doesn't notify within 8 weeks, then they are time barred. If there was an early warning put in, shouldn't that take away that time bar? I don't think actually it should, because the early warning is when it might be an issue, and it might be 1 day, 1 week, 1 month later when it becomes a problem, and that's when the clock starts ticking for then the notifying the CE. And if you don't put a notification in within 8 weeks from that point, then you will be time barred. The early warning is independent of the compensation fee. So I really don't see, I understand the point, but I don't see an issue. And to be honest, if that was the case, you'd find contractors chucking in early warnings just so one of them sticks and means that in the future we won't be time barred on a CE. Yeah. So I don't really see the need and the issue for that. No time for Nick's great question, which is what do the panel believe the next technological advances to support better outcomes on our projects? So can we please take that one in the LinkedIn group? It's a great question, Nick. So let's start that one in the LinkedIn group, and we'd probably be leaping into a big debate. So let's give that one the attention it deserves. Let's do it in the LinkedIn group. Okay, so closing out, what's been a great day. Massive thank you to sponsors, K&L Gates and all of our other sponsors that make this event possible for you, the delegates, for free. And also thank you to the attendees. Obviously it's thinned out slightly towards the end, but only sort of since mid-afternoon. You've made it a very engaging, very useful session. We've had lots of really good debates in the breakouts. So hopefully a very useful session for you guys as well. So what's next? Well, use the LinkedIn group, the NEC People LinkedIn group. Use it, post more discussions, post more issues. Let's feed off each other. Make a point of looking at the group once in a while, once a week, once a fortnight, once a month. See what discussions are going on in there. Ensure the level of your own understanding amongst your own staff and organisations and along the supply chain is continually to improve. I don't think any of us here wouldn't say every day is a school day. We don't know everything individually. John thinks he does.
John does.
But we don't know everything, and every day is a school day. We all learn something from our sessions and our debates, our discussions with you. So we're harnessing this group to make sure we're furthering that knowledge. So what's next, medium term? Well, following on from today, give us feedback within the group. So we'll put a post in the morning, give a comment on what you found today, what was your sort of highlight, which talk, what element that came out of today. So we'll start that discussion tomorrow. Make everyone else envious that they weren't here. Okay, so tell them what you think. And if the best thing was the bacon rolls, well, they were pretty good. But hopefully there was something else that was good rather than just the bacon rolls. Watch out for the announcements within the group to when the videos from today are available. A few weeks' time, so early July. There was a delay last year, but this year, early July, and we're going to have those videos out for you. What's next, the short term? Well, this is my favourite slide. The bar is open. Thank you for attending.